Thank you. I'd like to quote from Joseph Smith on voting of the lesser of two evils. There was a two-party system in the United States in 1844, much like there is today, in regards to the question of whether to vote for the Whig candidate or the Democratic candidate. In the election of 1844 and his unwillingness to vote for either, Joseph Smith stated, "We shall have the satisfaction of knowing that we have acted conscientiously and have used our best judgment, and if we have to throw away our votes, we had better do so upon a worthy candidate than an unworthy individual who might make use of the weapon to put in his hand to destroy us."
Don't fall asleep in the snow, come up from below, wipe the sleep from your eyes. Oh my.
A couple of months ago, there was a poll that came out that said that most or a plurality of BYU students support Bernie Sanders. So if the election was up to BYU, Bernie Sanders would be the next president of the United States. And we thought, wow, what in the world is going on with that? Why would BYU, a school that is based on, of course, it's owned by the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and that the church has condemned socialism. Joseph Smith said that he, condemned the doctrine and he didn't believe the doctrine, and then they later on church leaders called it the biggest satanical threat to peace and prosperity that we have today and to the gospel.
That was an official publication of the church where they called it that.
An official first presidency statement that they called it that, yeah.
Right.
And a publication that they printed and distributed through the home teaching program. And so why would a school that has that as its background be promoting that? So we had Hannah Stoddard of the Joseph Smith Foundation on the program to discuss that. And I know that so that poll that went out, it was said that it wasn't as reliable as they thought at first, because not just BYU students could participate in the poll, so it wasn't accurate as just BYU students. But what was interesting, and we just wrote an article we published at defendingutah.org about that, about the response that we got to our program, because there was actually a BYU professor that was upset that we would dare discuss what the actual teachings of the church were on the subject. And this professor at BYU, his name is Christian Clement of the German. He's he's an associate professor of German studies there at BYU. And when we posted the program with Hannah Stoddard discussing these things, he commented on our YouTube channel, at the Defending Utah's YouTube channel, and his first comment was, this is from Christian Clement, a BYU professor of German studies at BYU. He said, "President Benson obviously was not an intellectual giant, so we have to forgive him. I am sure there in the afterlife he is terribly embarrassed about many things he said and wrote while he was alive." More about that when we get back from the break. Also, we'll be speaking with we're working to get Scott Bradley, who's actually a Utah resident running for Vice President of the United States. More on The Naked Truth after the break.
Don't fall asleep in the snow, come up from below, wipe the sleep from your eyes. Oh my.
Welcome back. This is Ben McClintock with Enoch Moore of defendingutah.org on K-Talk Radio, AM 630. Go to k-talk.com with the Liberty lineup. This is the Naked Truth. Think right and wrong, not right and left. We are sponsored, of course, by Patriot Mobile. People are asking us, how can we join the Grassroots Network to get our updates and alerts? Just go to libertylineup.com. That's libertylineup.com and sign up. And if you like what you're hearing, you can support the cause of liberty with a donation of any amount. That's libertylineup.com. You can also like and share our Facebook page, The Liberty Lineup Radio Show. And also wanted to encourage you to subscribe to the Defending Utah YouTube channel. And right before we went to the break, we were talking about how there was this BYU professor that was commenting on the Defending Utah's YouTube channel about our conversation we had with Joseph Smith Foundation, Hannah Stoddard from the Joseph Smith Foundation, and how BYU was supporting Bernie Sanders. Not BYU, the students, BYU, not the organization. The students at BYU were supporting Bernie Sanders. And so we were talking about how weird that was, since the church that owns the university has come out repeatedly opposed to those positions, officially, not just random talks, one person once, but official statements by the church, and statements all the way back to Joseph Smith condemning.
In addition to countless talks.
In addition to countless talks.
So there have been countless personal opinions consistently over time, and officially in writing doctrine, because it's the whole First Presidency signing it.
And so this BYU professor, Christian Clement, who is an associate professor of German studies, wrote on our YouTube channel that President Benson was basically a dummy. And then he decided, maybe that wouldn't be a smart idea as a BYU professor to call church leaders an idiot. And so he probably felt that he should to change that. And so instead he says, as a BYU professor, so speaking as an employee of BYU, he says, I'm deeply disturbed and embarrassed that young people like Hannah, representing the LDS faith, possibly BYU graduates, are publicly displaying such ignorance, indoctrination, and small-mindedness. So this BYU professor, who has to, he has to have a recommend saying that these church leaders are prophets, seers, and revelators. But he says that if actually the youth actually believe those things and espouse those things taught by those individuals, that they are displaying ignorance, they're displaying their indoctrination, and they're displaying small-mindedness. It's small-minded to believe the words of church leaders, according to this BYU professor, Christian Clement.
And that was even the soft statement he made when he replaced his original one. Right? His original one, you want me to read that one?
We did that before the break, but about how he said that Benson was not an intellectual giant.
And he must be embarrassed.
That he's just
in the afterlife.
Right. And as a BYU professor, he probably thought, I probably shouldn't be saying that about church leaders. So, well, on the line, we have Scott Bradley, who is on the Constitution Party's ticket for vice president. Scott, thanks for joining us.
Well, it's always great to be able to visit with you folks. We're always astounded at the small-mindedness of some of those that consider themselves to be intellectual giants, but literally, I think, have demonstrated kind of repeatedly and unequivocally where they really stand. So they'll sooner or later, I guess, be able to address those issues to a God that really knows everything. But at any rate, that's their problem, not mine.
So you were just nominated as the official candidate for vice president for the Constitution Party. Tell us about that.
Well, yes, it's honestly. First of all, let me say about Darrell Castle. He's the presidential nominee, and Darrell's the real deal. Darrell is soundly founded, deeply principled. He's a man of character, integrity, and has demonstrated so his entire life. He's a guy that I had hoped for years, literally, to be able to vote for as president. And so he was nominated. Actually, the whole story be known, he was drafted by the Constitution Party. He was not running for president. And this is such a far cry from what we are engaged in. We have this beauty contest that goes on interminably. I mean, it goes on year to year to year, of these individuals that are crying low here and low there. Come and vote for me. I'm the guy that's going to take care of you. And they have these beauty contests that cost multiple billions of dollars, literally, when you throw all the candidates in and what they're spending. And so you look back to the early years of this great republic, and George Washington had to be prevailed upon to accept the assignment. And that was kind of the standard. The people wanted the kind of principled character that George Washington represented. And that's kind of what happened with Darrell. And so I felt really good about Darrell being nominated. In a way, he's I liken him to Calvin Coolidge. Calvin Coolidge, by the way, is arguably the best president we had in the 20th century. I'm not saying he's perfect. He had some flaws. There's no doubt about that. But he tried to do principled things, I think, and had a pretty deep foundation about that. But he was very, he wasn't really gabby. In fact, the story's told about one time a woman sat next to him at a state dinner, and she told him she had bet somebody that she could get him to say more than 2 words during the dinner. And he looked at her and said, "You lose," and never said anything else the rest of the evening. and so he was a man of few words, but when he spoke, he was worth listening to. That's kind of Darrell Castle. So when Darrell named me as his running mate, I was kind of a deer in the headlights, honestly. I mean, there had been some conversation with him before about it, but I honestly thought he'd chosen somebody else. And you can go and look. C-SPAN was filming the whole event, and so it took me a while to get to the stand at the convention because I kind of was feeling a little more relaxed before that moment. It was at the very back of the convention. So anyway, I'm honored to be able to do it. The vice presidential assignment is kind of a superfluous job in many people's opinions, but they sit as president of the Senate. If you read in Article 1, Section 3, that's in the Constitution. Thomas Jefferson made good use of his time when he was there. He wrote some magnificent rules for the Senate to operate under that they've continued to erode and devolve from, but he really set the Senate up as a truly statesman-like organization that was to truly do a deliberative job on everything they did. Now, they've stopped doing it. But the vice president would sit as president of the Senate, but wouldn't get to vote unless there was a tie vote, basically. But beside that, this idea of being able to have a platform to take the message of liberty and proper government back to this nation. If you look at who is currently running, I mean, we had 17 Republicans, for crying out loud. And it's astounding to me that the people that are still remaining in the race for Republican and Democrat, I cannot even believe that the nation has fallen that far. I mean, Hillary should be in prison for any number of reasons, and having held high security clearances in past lives, and knowing the rules engaged with those things, I know that the things that she did would have landed me in prison had I done them. I mean, you look at Bernie Sanders, an avowed socialist, which, as you pointed out earlier, from Joseph Smith forward in the LDS Church, Joseph Smith and John Taylor attended a class on socialism. And Joseph Smith spoke against it, and John Taylor's later writings show that he fully understood what Joseph Smith said about it. But here's a guy that's fully engaged in that. Well, and then you get a guy like Trump that, masterful at being able to capture what's on the minds of the regular common folk, but nothing he's ever said would indicate to me he's read the Constitution, and nothing he's ever said would indicate to me that he's going to keep his actions within the bounds established by the Constitution. Ted Cruz and Heidi, he's either sleeping with the enemy or he is the enemy. She's a Council on Foreign Relations advocate of the North American Union, which has to do away with the Constitution in order to be able to fully be implemented. And he is for a Constitution Convention. Duh, we can start to connect the dots. His foreign policy things, his trade agreement things, he's been unwilling to prove that, according to the law, he's eligible to run for the presidency job as a natural-born citizen. And there's a lot more to that we could talk about if you want to. I mean, you look at everybody that seems to be running right now is for a Constitution Convention. They're all fatally flawed. It's astonishing to me. So anyway, it's refreshing to give the people an opportunity to recenter their thoughts, their hearts, their hopes upon that which made America the greatest, freest, strongest, most happy, most prosperous nation on earth when we actually abided by the Constitution instead of letting it be a dead letter that simply is there in form but is a relatively, I guess I would say, skeletal remains of what this great nation was at its foundation. So that's what we'll be working to try and re-energize within the hearts of the people. This is a vanguard movement. We're trying to point the way back to to the foundation that made us what we were once. And so it's an opportunity to do that on a worldwide, maybe not worldwide, maybe kind of though, at least on a national basis. So that's kind of what's motivating me and what my hopes are, and
that's
hopefully
great.
we'll be able to get some people's ears as we do this.
So just for our listeners, we're speaking with Dr. Scott Bradley, and we wanted to have you on as a Utah native, actually on a presidential ticket. You're running as the vice presidential candidate for the Constitution Party, and again, people can find out. I mean, if there was ever a constitutional scholar, somebody that we could trust to understand the Constitution, it would be you, Dr. Scott Bradley, and people can find out about that at freedomsrisingsun.com. It's .com, right?
That's correct, and of course Daryl's team that he's put together for putting together his technology and everything else like that is putting out other websites. I am going to be doing probably twice a week, maybe forever, long past the campaign. Well, this is not going to end when the campaign's over. Not going to end at the election day. It'll go until I have no more breath. And
absolutely.
And so we're going to be doing webinars where we'll send out emails and invite people to, and hopefully there'll be thousands of people to participate in those and we'll take individual subjects that actually are foundational to the nation's continued existence. We'll talk about current events, and it will probably be a couple of times a week through the election, and like I said, that'll continue after the election, and so we're just getting that arranged right now, but we're going to try and just center this on the things that made America what America was before we forgot what we were about, and that we forgot that when we left the Constitution.
And you've got the record to prove that. I think that's pretty clear, Scott, Dr. Bradley. And people, if they're looking at their websites, look you up. They could look at the YouTube videos that you've done. It's pretty clear. And we've got about 3 minutes until the break. I've got two questions I'd like you to answer in those 3 minutes. Ted Cruz, who won the state of Utah for the Republican primary, has just announced his vice presidential candidate, Miss Fiorina. I can never pronounce her name.
Carly Fiorina?
Yeah. And how would you be different than her? And then it looks like Donald Trump is going to be the Republican nominee. And since Utah has a lot of this never Trump kind of mentality, tell them, that conservatives have a real choice this election if they are among the never Trump crowd, and tell us about that.
Well, actually, Carly, I can't possibly imagine why he chose her, except she's a female, and he is probably anticipating a run against Hillary, and he's trying to deflect a little bit of the sexist stuff that's out there. This is not about sex, folks. This is about restoring everything we hold sacred, and it has nothing to do with the superfluous and superficial things that we're looking at. I don't know how she can run on her track record as a business person. I think there was a disaster when she did what she did. I don't think there's a sound basis for saying that she understands what this nation is built. I guess I can't find much common ground with her other than she's a human being and we should care for all human beings. But the fact of the matter is I think that it was a preemptive strike on his part to try and gain some traction. He's going to be cast aside by the establishment too, by the way, when in any way, shape, or form, if they end up deflecting Trump's nomination, I don't think Cruz is going to prevail either. But it was almost a desperate attempt, I think, on his part to gain some of the limelight back to himself by choosing prematurely, I believe, a vice presidential candidate.
I'm sorry, Scott Bradley. We've got 1 minute left. Is there a website that you guys have for your campaign?
Look up Darrell Castle 2016. It's still under development and everything, but of course, I've still got my stuff, as you pointed out, Freedom's Rising Sun, and To Preserve the Nation's my book, and Scott M. Bradley. You can look up some of those things. I've got hundreds of YouTubes out there, but a lot of them are an hour and a half long, so they're kind of academic in purpose.
Unfortunately, liberty can't always be explained in a bumper sticker statement. Thank you, Dr. Scott Bradley, who is candidate for the Constitution Party for vice president. Appreciate you joining us.
You bet. Glad to be with you. Thank you.
Talk to you soon.
Bye.
This is Ben McClintock with my co-host,
Enoch Moore
of DefendingUtah.org, and today is the Naked Truth segment of the Liberty Lineup, where we think right and wrong, not right and left. We are on AM 630 K-Talk.com. What do you think what we've been discussing? The BYU professor, Scott Bradley. Go to our Facebook page, the Liberty Lineup Radio Show. Comment now, like and share. You can also call us at 801-254-5855. We'll be back right after the break. We'll be talking more about some of the reports that we've come out with on our website, DefendingUtah.org. Was there a CPS worker in the state of Utah that is actually praising a child rapist? Back right after the break.
We believe in the American way, and we built this country called the USA, and we fly our flag.
We are back. This is Ben McClintock with my co-host
Enoch Moore
of DefendingUtah.org, and we are on K-Talk Radio, AM 630, K-Talk.com with the Liberty Lineup Naked Truth segment, where we think right and wrong, not right and left. Of course, we are sponsored by Patriot Mobile. Join our grassroots network to get our updates and alerts. Just go to libertylineup.com. That's libertylineup.com and sign up. And if you like what you're hearing, support Liberty with a donation of any amount. That's libertylineup.com. You can also like and share our Facebook page, the Liberty Lineup Radio Show. And before we went to the break, well, of course, we encourage you also to go to the Defending Utah YouTube channel and subscribe. We were talking about BYU. Well, right before we went to the break, we had Dr. Scott Bradley, who is a Utah native, who is on the Constitution Party's ticket for Vice President of the United States.
And you may be wondering to yourself, well, I like the Constitution Party. I like these third parties. They're a better choice. You know, we don't see the same corruption in the two-party system, but there's no chance they'll ever win. So I'll just pick who I think might win because
the lesser of two evils.
The lesser of two evils.
Because if you don't vote for lesser of two evils, more evil wins.
Right. So a prophet of the Lord addressed that exact question one time, and so we thought we would just bring up this principle, and we can just ponder it. And so we're not necessarily saying do or don't vote third party, or if you love Cruz and Cruz gets the nominee or some other guy. I mean, we're not saying anything one way or another. We're going to speak a true principle here. Right. And then you should always consider this principle in any voting you do, whether on local or national or any kind of level. But Ezra Taft Benson said, quote, "If you vote for the lesser of two evils, you are still voting for evil and you will be judged for it. You should always vote for the best possible candidate, whether they have a chance of winning or not. And then, even if the worst possible candidate wins, the Lord will bless our country because more people were willing to stand up for what is right."
And that's actually been borne out. There's Stephen Pratt, who's also a local, a Utahn. Before he died, he gave a great talk that addressed this very issue of voting for the lesser of two evils. And so he brought up the point between Bill Clinton and George W. Bush. Most people that consider themselves conservatives would consider George W. Bush the lesser of two evils. Conservative would never vote for Bill Clinton. And so he compared the records, and he actually showed that through all the key conservative points, whether it be life, whether it be property rights, whether it be taxes, all of the different things that you can think of that a conservative would base his record on, he said that actually the lesser of two evils in those two scenarios was Bill Clinton.
Yeah, just based on the record.
Just based on the record, right. Not on rhetoric, but on the record. And that's because the record's the only thing that actually matters, but it doesn't matter what they say if they're going to do something completely different. And that's really I think a true it's the case time after time. No matter what you put the two different lesser of two evils together, and because the conservative gets away with things, conservatives are not going to hold Bush as accountable as he would President Obama. And so he's able to get away with more things. Both people doing the same exact thing. A conservative is going to give Obama more of a hard time than he would a Bush or a Cruz or a Trump. And so and so of course the Democrats are trying to push them more left, and so they're not going to get that opposition. So the Republicans usually end up being more left than the Democrats that get the opposition from conservatives. And so it's important that we realize that and that we don't vote for the lesser of two evils. If we think that a candidate is the lesser of two evils, we should really consider not voting for that person.
So next time you're in the voting booth and you really don't know who to vote for and you're looking at the options and you're like, man, this guy, he's not going to work because of, reason X, and this guy won't work because of reason Y, and you're just thinking, and you're just going to randomly pick, I'll just vote my traditional party or I'll just vote whatever. If you know that those options are not good because you know that those people don't stand by the things that you stand by, then remember what Benson said. The Lord will bless our country more because more people were willing to stand up for what is right, even if the worst possible candidate wins. So you should always vote for the best possible candidate. So
because a lot of times we're wrong on who the best possible candidate is anyway.
That's true.
Because people would have probably thought that Bill Clinton would have been a worse candidate than George Bush. Not that they were running against each other, but people would have assumed that. And so because too often we think about, we trust people what they say versus what they do. And that's something that the Savior himself taught, was this principle of wolves in sheep's clothing. Wolves are less dangerous than the wolves in sheep's clothing. Those that are promoting themselves as being pro-liberty but are not are more dangerous to us because we will let them get away with stuff. We're trusting them to come into the flock because we think they're one of us when they're there to destroy us. And so we need to understand that those wolves are actually less dangerous.
What do you think? 801-254-5855. Join the conversation.
So let's play a clip. We did another article on defendingutah.org. The name of the article is "Utah Child Caseworker Calls Rapist a Personal Hero of His." And along these lines before we play the clip, there's a clip I want to play. But on the 19th of this month, the Salt Lake City voted to name one of its streets, 900 South, after the rapist Harvey Milk. And a child caseworker by the name of Bryce Hurst, who works for the Utah Division of Child and Family Services, said, quote, "Salt Lake City is one of the gayest cities in America." So he's not saying it as a bad thing. He's saying it as, that's why we need to name this street after the child rapist. And so, so it's the gayest city in America. So we want to be all inclusive. We want to be, open-minded, and we want to make sure that we're not being judgmental and that we're allowing people to have the liberty that they have the right to. And so sometimes we're open to that idea of allowing cities or streets to be named after this kind of stuff. But it's not actually about liberty. There's a let me see if we can cue this up. Hopefully, we've got Masha Gessen, who is a prominent homosexual activist, who talked about the truth behind the gay agenda. And it looks like we're having a little bit of technical difficulties on the internet.
That's all right. How about let's try to resolve that. We can take a call real quick. We have a call, Bill in West Jordan, who wants to also talk about the lesser of two evils.
Bill, you're on with Ben McClintock and Enoch Moore.
Thank you. I'd like to quote from Joseph Smith on voting of the lesser of two evils. There was a two-party system in the United States in 1844, much like there is today, in regards to the question of whether to vote for the Whig candidate or the Democratic candidate. In the election of 1844 and his unwillingness to vote for either, Joseph Smith stated, "We shall have the satisfaction of knowing that we have acted conscientiously and have used our best judgment. And if we have to throw away our votes, we had better do so upon a worthy candidate than an unworthy individual who might make use of the weapon to put in his hand. We put in his hand to destroy us.
That is absolutely perfect. That is a powerful. That is a very powerful statement from Joseph Smith. Absolutely.
Well, these people that thought they had a real, that were jumping up and down when they had Romney on the ticket, I really feel sorry for them because they really bought into the neocon Gadianton agenda.
Oh, they sure did. I agree with you there. Thank you. Thanks, caller. Or thanks, Bill.
Yeah, that's a principle that we need to make sure that we don't forget, because that's put us in the situation that we're in. And people always say, well, voting third party is what got Bill Clinton in there. Well, no. Voting third party is not what put Bill Clinton in there. Well, we know that George Herbert Walker Bush was definitely a conspirator as much as Bill Clinton was. And so it's like this. So Carroll Quigley, he was a professor at Georgetown University. He said that, and he was able to study the papers of the conspiracy, and he said his only disagreement with them was that they wished to remain a secret. So when he says these things, he's not being, antagonistic towards them, but he said that basically the two parties are supposed to be represented as being different, so that way we can throw the rascals out and have nothing actually change. And so it's this whole professional wrestling match basically between the candidates. And so we think we're getting somebody as if Bill Clinton would have been worse than Herbert Walker Bush, who promised to not raise taxes but raised taxes, and who nominated some of the most liberal judges to the Supreme Court that we have on there. And so it's really a sham that we're led to believe to be able to continue in this Republican versus Democrat system, when we actually need to be focused on voting for what's right, not who's less bad.
All right, so we've got our internet back up, or we have a call. We go either route.
Let's just go to the caller, and we're gonna play Russian roulette and see if this caller. You are on with Ben and Enoch.
Yeah, I have a question, if I may.
Okay.
I walked in the room, I turned the radio on, I just heard the last part of the last caller. Now, was he indicating what about the lesser of two evils?
That you stay away from it.
Okay. Now, was Romney one of the lesser of two evils?
He was definitely one of the evils, for sure.
Okay. And if that's the way you guys see it, if that's the way the caller's hot, hey, I'm all for you. Okay.
Awesome. Great.
I think he was the biggest sheep in wolf clothing, or
wolf in sheep clothing
that we have ever worn.
Absolutely. People don't realize. Okay. Thanks. Appreciate your call, caller. People don't realize that he actually wrote a letter to the Log Cabin Republicans. So these are the gay Republican club, and he said that he's more in favor of gay rights than Ted Kennedy. When he was governor of Massachusetts, he set up a youth gay pride event where he had one of the opening statements was, "There's nothing quite like youth pride." People don't realize this. There was a video where he was interviewed, and they asked him about his faith and if the leader of the church would ask him to do something, would he just do it blindly? And he said, well, I don't think God's spoken to anybody since Moses. And so kind of brushing it off. So, there's a lot of different issues with Mitt Romney. And the lesser of two evils, did voting for a third party give us more evil? I don't know.
Romney also miserably failed the constitutional war powers question.
And he actually, during the debates, it was pretty funny. He actually relegated his answer over to Ron Paul.
Yeah.
He's like, well, why don't you ask the constitutional expert? Well, if you're running for president, maybe you should know what the Constitution says.